Hello again everyone, I hope you're all keeping well. I thought I'd speak a little bit more in this video about the continuing developments in South Africa. In the last few days alone, the government there has given the go-ahead to its policies of agrarian reform. They're making changes to the constitution to allow for that. And this is a euphemism, that is to say, to call it agrarian reform, because what it's really fundamentally about is stealing land. Now, agrarian reform has been tried mostly by countries who were either sympathetic to or were outright, overtly communist in nature. They have tried this in Cuba, they tried it in the Soviet Union, they tried it in China, and it does not work. See, they see it as a means of redistributing wealth, the quick and easy way of doing it. But there's a reason why this doesn't work, and that's to do with the fact that you are taking land that has been made valuable. It has been made valuable by those who were the previous proper owners of it. And you are then giving it to people who may or may not truly invest in that land. And I'm not just talking financially, I'm talking about the fact that land has to be taken care of, in the case of farming especially. And the land, any land can lose its value or lose a portion of that value, sometimes a bulk portion of it, if it is made to, if it isn't looked after properly, if it's devalued, right? If the proper investment isn't put into it, and not just in monetary terms, but in other ways, in terms of labour, in terms of the crop yields and so forth, if it is not farmed properly, to put it simply, then it will lose its value. And then you have a secondary problem to deal with, which is far more serious. And this again has happened in Cuba, in China, and in the Soviet Union, and many other countries that have tried this method of redressing or addressing the problems which they feel exist in their own countries or previously existed within their own countries. It doesn't work because not only of this issue of not taking care of the land, but in that whole process, especially in the case of farming, what happens is that countries depend still to this day on food production. Okay, and if that is, if it is curtailed in some way, if food is prevented from being properly grown, if there's a problem with the production of crops, you are going to see mass famines. Okay, and this has happened time and time and time again. Now, there's another problem which exists in terms of addressing how seriously these matters are escalating inside South Africa, and that is to do with the media and the way that they are portraying what is going on, and the excuse machine, let's call it, which exists to excuse the actions of various governments. You see, most media corporations and outlets are absolutely in league with the majority of governments out there in this day and age. And this is part of the reason why there's this deep-seated anger in the mass populace of the world at large, if we're honest about it. And so they're mouthpieces. And one of the things that they're trying to do with this situation that's developing in South Africa is to make it appear that it is not as serious as what it actually is. There are many farm murders which are happening. White farmers are being murdered in particular, but you also see black farmers being killed as well, all in the name of this agrarian reform. It's actually, again, a communist-driven agenda, unfortunately. Because the ruling party there were successful in masquerading as being liberal for some time, during, say, Nelson Mandela's imprisonment, but those folks that are certainly in charge of the ANC in South Africa today, they are absolutely outright communists, and they have shown this. They have pinned their colours to the mast. But the fact is that the press are making it appear to not be a very serious problem right now, right? Because they're using statistics to they're manipulating statistics to make it appear that it is not what it actually is, and they do this all the time. We're more than familiar with it in most countries these days, but some people still aren't with it. And the problem here is that they've done this before. Okay, they've done this before. The press outlets have done this with, say, for example, the Bosnian genocide, where innocent Muslims were massacred because they were seen as having more, or doing better in some way, or whatever else was happening. You see, a lot of this kind of nonsense creeped into it, into that situation, but into other situations as well, like what happened in Rwanda as well. These sorts of sometimes racially motivated, sometimes ethnically motivated genocides which have happened, and you know, they continue to happen if we're honest about it. Every time you find that the press at large tries to cover it up, okay, because the establishment have a vested interest in not letting the truth get out, so that, you know, because they know that if it got out, there would be international outcries. And so we've got the same kind of thing brewing in South Africa right now, and some of the ways in which these farmers are being killed, or their families are being tortured and killed, are extreme. And again, you know, there's this wish on the part of people who are sympathetic to the positions of the ANC. There's this wish, which is, by the way, is a corrupt party. That has been proven time and time again, whether it's with this issue of Jacob Zuma, who is, facing, or is supposed to face, I don't really know how that's going, because South Africa right now is in a bit of a quagmire. It's hard to tell what's happening anywhere, whether the rule of law actually does exist. He's supposed to be going through these legal proceedings, but it's a bit of a mess, really. This whole thing is a serious mess. But the people who are sympathetic to the ANC, they are trying their damnedest to paint it as being a simple case of theft. Okay? And I would argue against that, because even if that was the case, which it isn't, but even if it was, I would say, what's so simple about theft? Okay? What's so simple about people being attacked because of their race? You know, there's nothing simple about that. Or because of their political beliefs, which is happening. Like I said, black farmers are being attacked in South Africa as well, because and it all gets very, very odd, really, with this, because you start to question, you start to wonder, you know, is there any way of disentangling the truth in this type of nightmare scenario? And it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. So, you know, you can do the best that you can by looking at a variety of sources, and where you see that all sources are trying their best, those people that are grassroots folks in any given country or community or society, when they're trying via social media to get their message out there, but are sometimes being prevented from doing that, when others are trying to do the same thing, you know, and they are from right across the political spectrum, these folks. then you can say, well, hold on a second, this thing actually, quite probably, there's a high probability, a high likelihood, it is happening. Okay? And it is, they are incorporating elements of racial hatred into it. And keep in mind that the ruling party there is the ANC. They are the ones in charge. Okay, now the opposition party over there isn't any better in many regards, but they're fanning the flames certainly of racial hatred. It was supposed to be the Great Rainbow Nation. I've met many people that I've spoken to who are from South Africa, or who left South Africa actually over the last few years. And in each occasion, it has been the case that they have said, well, the situations there are getting worse and worse. They are not getting better. So the misrepresentations of the media, do I believe those? No. I believe the accounts directly from people that I have known over a period of time who have lived there or who have experienced what is going on there. Okay, I'm inclined to believe them. Many of them have left already. They left in the last 20 odd years because they could see the direction in which that country was going, and it wasn't a good direction. But some of the stories that you read about this, or that you hear about this stuff that's going on there, and it's anecdotal, granted, but nonetheless, I mean, you know, there's still first-hand, second-hand accounts of what's happening. You hear these stories of kids being tortured and boiled to death in boiling water. You hear about the rapes and the murders of women there, the children too sometimes. It is absolutely horrifying to see or hear of these events, about which, of course, see, the media doesn't want to accurately report what has happened over there in that country, but also worldwide as well. But these things are a reality. There are police reports that have been filed over and over and over again regarding many of these incidents. And they just want to pretend that this is not the case, that South Africa isn't descending into an all-out genocidal conflict, okay? And that other people are going to get caught up in that. Even black people, right? If you want to make it about the racial component that's involved in this. But you have folks that are part of the ruling party there, which have been chanting for the shooting of, the killing of those folks that are racially different from them. That is the definition of racism. Okay, but the global media, let's call it, and also the internal media there to some degree, if you look at some of the numbers in terms of how they're reporting many of the things that are going on, they are very, very purposefully trying to cover it all up. They're trying to make it seem as though this is not happening or whatever else. But again, if you understand the state of affairs over there, if you've had some first-hand contact with the country itself or the people from that country, you will know that it is not getting any better. Okay, I was reading a story just today that cited that, things are getting better because there's less farm murders actually happening on farmlands in South Africa now than there were in the last, I think it was 10 or 15 years or whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is that those folks are assuming that the statistics that they're being given by government agencies are accurate. As if the government agencies don't have a vested interest in lying about what is happening inside the country, about lying about the statistics, the numbers. It's just lunacy, you know. But the reason they're doing this is because of their own. That is to say, the media. The reason the media are doing this is because of their own political biases, right? Because most media outlets, not all, but most of them, are very much on the far left. They support far left ideas and agendas. And it's not just the far left. You find this with so-called right-wing media outlets as well. In America, let's say, we could take Fox News. They're still in support of the overall agenda when, say, for example, George W. Bush was in power or whatever. They were still pushing for government, right? It's always in favor. This is the thing people don't understand. They're not true to their principles. Okay? It's always about supporting the government so that they are never out of favor with it, and thus they are never targeted or whatever else. Right? That's what it's fundamentally all about. And there's more to it than that, but that is essentially the crux of it. The point being that unless people start wising up to what is going on, it'll never be addressed, and it is going to turn into a massively serious humanitarian crisis. This is the other thing people don't understand. Each farm there, going by the various estimates I've read and heard, each farm there supplies approximately 2,000 to 3,000 people with food. Okay? If farming ceases en masse in the country, or even by a significant percentage, or even a small percentage in some ways, if that happens, then you are going to see, like you saw in Cuba, like you saw in Soviet Russia, like you saw in China, mass famines. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are going to die. Okay, it will erupt into a massively serious humanitarian crisis. This has happened in Rwanda as well. The world ignored what was going on, and lo and behold, not only was there mass killing, mass death, the complete annihilation and eradication of one ethnic group, but you also saw mass poverty and hunger. And the reason that happened, that famine, was because the situation that was developing in Rwanda wasn't checked. It wasn't put in check, right? Nobody was there to say this is wrong. Now, I opposed everything that was happening in the Rwandan genocide. I opposed everything that was happening during the Bosnian genocide. But each time, right, the UN or whatever else, whatever other countries have ignored the realities on the ground, or their press have misreported what was happening, the end result always ended up being hell on earth. So this is the direction in which South Africa is going. If we're lucky, by raising our voices about it, we will be able to have some kind of impact, okay, on governments or other organizations to at least bring attention to it. And Trump has already done that. Now, it's up to the British government to do the same thing. They must raise this issue in Parliament, for example, right? Or the European Union, they must do this. Because it is unacceptable that we allow each time these atrocities happen. It's unacceptable that we just sit on the sidelines as human beings. And, to be fair, South Africa's not the only situation with which this is happening. It's one of the most serious right now because of the pace at which it is escalating. But you see the same kind of things in a different way happening in Yemen, for example, where there's an eradication of a whole people's, thanks to the Saudi government there, who we, for some unusual and inexplicable reason in the West, consider allies, and it's probably to do with oil, right? We've got that going on. The Yemenis crisis. Syria's destabilized. You've got the Israel-Palestine conflict that is still ongoing. That's never properly going to be resolved so long as people don't understand that fully. And each time people either become polarized, which makes it impossible to actually fix the situation, or they just ignore it. And those aren't the proper solutions to any given problem such as that. Okay? And it's certainly not the solution when it comes to the issue of what's happening inside South Africa right now, where this is going on. Okay? But not respecting the ownership rights of people. Whenever a government has done that, whenever a country has done that, or its people have done that, it has never ended well for them. Again, you can see from the former communist bloc, the countries that were part of that, how that goes. Whether it was the Ukrainian famine, which happened as a result of the direct policies of the Soviet Union taking the farms away from the kulaks, whether it was the Cuban crisis, which happened because they took all the farms away, they insisted on putting ordinary city-dwelling folk in charge of running those farms and owning those farms. Well, not really owning them, but running the farms, because communism doesn't believe in ownership, which is a really, really sinister thing, if I'm honest. But that's the thing. So each time, it has never gone well. And these people who are doing that, whether it's the ANC, whether it's their militant wing, which is responsible for a lot of these murders that are happening and the torture that is going on, whether it's them, whether it's people inside the population, whoever it might be, they can't see that their own actions are going to lead to their own self-destruction. And I think it's incredibly heartbreaking, because it's not only the case that they can't see that they are doing things, especially when they are being brutal towards hardworking families, but they also don't seem to acknowledge in any way, shape or form that they have lost their humanity. You know, and to talk about this thing, this is the other part of this as well. Let me say this as well. The people that support the idea of agrarian reform, land redistribution or whatever, inside South Africa, they always cite that the land was stolen from them. Okay? And I find myself questioning, what do you mean by that? It's an important question. What do you mean by that? Okay? Did anyone physically steal land from you? And the answer typically actually is no. Oh, then are they talking about what someone's ancestors did? Possibly. Well, then you look at that. Well, then you ask, how did the farmers in South Africa, be they black or white, acquire that land? Originally, I'm not talking about during this land reform nonsense, but how was it originally acquired and owned? Some of it because of imperial conquest, right? Some of it was gained through conquering, was gained through warfare to some degree. But you have to remember, there was no such country as South Africa once upon a time. Okay, and it wasn't that long ago, incidentally. Right? And in historical terms, it wasn't that long ago. It's been a few hundred years. But anyway. So whether it was the Dutch or the British or whoever else, right, when their empires were expanding, you see this thing where either it was conquered land or it was empty land which they planted their flag on. And there was a lot of empty land, by the way, unusable land that was not arable, okay? And they made it arable. This happened. The same thing partly happened with Israel a little bit, but you find that those societies, or those empires even in the ancient world, and that's not to say empires don't exist now, but those empires that were capable of using their technology to make the land work for them, did that. Okay? So some of it, as I say, was gained as a result of colonialism. Some of it was gained as a result of it just not being used by anybody, by the way, in South Africa, right? And some of it was gained just through numerous, what we would call today business deals. In those days, they were treaties that were signed between peoples in exchange for goods or services. Right? So this happened quite a lot. It's not straightforward. It is not as simple as the land was stolen from us. And then the other question is, who is us? Okay? Well, it's the same question really. Who is us? Are you talking about the people that had some kind of ancestral claim to that land? Or are you talking about people that just because of the color of their skin or their ethnicity claim to be the rightful inheritors? What are you talking about exactly? See, it gets very, very convoluted when you really start drilling down into it. Do these people really have a claim to that land? Whether legally or morally or ethically? Some of them actually might. I mean, in all fairness, some of them might, but the majority of them probably don't. But they claim to be a part of something that they were not a part of. You know, and we mustn't forget that there were warring tribes inside South Africa as well. As with many other nations, there were warring tribes that were constantly battling with one another, who would conquer and take over each other's land. And so you'd have one tribe conquering another tribe and then possibly making a trade deal with the conquering empires that came along and selling that land on. Right? So it's not straightforward. But this simplistic, reductionist view that it is simple, okay, that it's a case of us versus them, that's used to propagate and continue perpetual hatred, perpetual segregation, perpetual warfare, all the time, every time. And this is what is happening in South Africa today, right? And I don't have to tell you guys that in the old days, this was, an added problem to this was that you had the Russian KGB, the Soviet KGB at that time, pumping a lot of propaganda into the country in order to destabilize it, which they successfully eventually did. And not only were the KGB involved in that, and this is a matter of recorded history, it is a documented fact, but you also had the Chinese doing the same thing, and the Chinese still are doing the same thing. You see, because I'm sure you're all familiar, there are greater political happenings that relate to this in terms of the One Belt, One Road initiative, trying to re-establish sort of a Silk Road style import-export business for China of minerals, very valuable raw materials and minerals inside Africa, all of Africa. And South Africa plays a part in that because the transportation systems that they would have to use to take things from the north of the African continent to China and so forth would involve going through South Africa as well. So these, again, are important things to keep in mind. It's not straightforward, it's not simple, and those people that proclaim to be in favour of justice or whatever else, I would question their motives, because I do not think that the reductionist way of, or that sort of simplistic way of looking at something is the correct way of looking at it. Because you don't have a deep level, you're not applying a deep level of analysis to the problem and you're certainly not going to come up with viable solutions to any given problems. If there are ethnic tensions, there are solutions to be found. What might they be? Well, maybe it's to do with dialogue. Maybe it's to do with not inciting violence. Maybe it's to do with helping to live up to a standard of true fairness and justice for every citizen as best as you can. Maybe these are the solutions that need to be implemented, and not this wackadoodle, far leftist, extremist, ethnically genocidal political doctrine. But that's as far as I see it, what the fundamental problems there are. And there are probably many more that I haven't mentioned, but my goodness, it's a, like I said before, it's a quagmire of problems, and we actually need experts of one kind or another to look at South Africa, to look at the problems it's facing, and to see whether something can be done about changing the way in which they are running their daily politics. Because that's what they're doing just now is not going to work for them. What they're doing just now is going to destabilize the entire nation, which is not going to be in the interests of the Chinese, by the way. So the Chinese won't be happy with that, although they are communist. But if South Africa is destabilized, it doesn't really help their long-term objectives at all. They want a little bit of destabilization so that they can keep people warring there while they're taking the minerals out. That's colonialism, that's empire by another name, incidentally, right? Today it's the Chinese. Before, it was the British and the Dutch. Okay? But whichever empire it is or was that does it, that goes into these countries, you find that there's always this this wish to push the focus on other matters, which is part of the reason why you see continuously empires championing racial segregation or and I don't mean in the sense that groups don't segregate themselves in some regions. Okay? But I'm talking about governmentally enforced segregation, which is massive overreach in terms of what government is supposed to be anyway. Right? But empire does this because it makes it easy for them to take raw materials and minerals out of countries and leave them barren, insofar as the inherent worth or value of that particular piece of geography. On a related note, isn't it interesting that the mining companies like Barrick Gold, for example, or the De Beers diamond miners, right? The diamond mining company, De Beers, and all these other kind of firms as well that do other types of that deal in other types of minerals. Nobody's talking about them, are they, right now? And they're taking massive quantities, seriously massive quantities of precious metals, of commodities, other types of commodities, other metals, and what have you, like iron and iron ore and so on. They're taking gold, they're taking the diamonds, as I say. Everything's coming out of there. But the people that are in the political array there, right? They aren't talking about any of that, are they? Isn't that interesting? Isn't it fascinating that the real mechanisms that are making South Africa a poorer nation, nobody wants to do anything about that or do anything about these conglomerate mega corporations that are stealing the wealth straight out of the countries. Okay, or the banking arms and giants and corporations that are doing very much the same thing. The destabilization of entire financial markets and so on. Nobody's talking about that, right? The ANC aren't talking about that. No, they are heaping the blame. It's amazing, and this is where the corruption comes in. They're heaping the blame onto the farmers, the white folks, or the black farmers, or the whoever, right? White farmers, black farmers, wherever they can, people who own land. That's where they're heaping the blame, instead of looking at things from a proper perspective and saying, well, do you know what? There are massive corporate arms that are stealing from our nation. They won't do that. They won't tackle the banks because, see, here's the thing. Just like what happened with Zimbabwe, what did we see? Robert Mugabe is making an absolute fortune. Okay, and he's investing it in foreign banks. Swiss bank accounts and British bank accounts and every other type of bank account, and going on spending sprees and you name it, right? This is well, it wasn't Mugabe that did that, but his wife. But the point is, in terms of the spending sprees, but the point is that this is what it's all about: greed and money, right? It fundamentally rests on this. Steal, okay? The ethos of the people who are in power inside South Africa is greed and racial hatred, okay? And they can use methods of playing one group of people against another to their own benefit, because whilst people are fighting over there, nobody's looking at them making off with all the cash. Do you see? This is why South Africa is continuing to go down the same route as Zimbabwe did, or Venezuela did. Okay? Anyway, I'm going to leave it there for this video, because I've covered, well, there's more to cover, but I've covered quite a bit, I think, in regards to this. And as I say, the situation is escalating there, so we do need to keep a proper eye on it, and hopefully the people inside South Africa who are of good character, of just character, of any whatever ethnic background they belong to, will be able to rectify this gross, heinous moral wrong, which is what it is. Theft is never acceptable. Okay? Anyway, as I say, I'll leave it there, but thank you very much for watching. Take good care of yourselves, and God bless every one of you.